Caillou, I asked you to be a big brother and take care of Rosie, not fight with her.
Caillou thought it was very unfair that Mommy was mad at him. He had done his best to be quiet. It was all Rosie's fault.
Hello everyone and welcome to my manga review for Buddha. This is a historical manga series written and illustrated by the late great Osamu Tezuka, and it was serialized in Comic Tom from 1972 to 1983, of course making it not only one of Tezuka's longest works, but one of his most notable ones as well. And it's one that has been sitting in my collection collecting dust for quite a while. But I finally got to it. I finally got to the end of my backlog, and here it was waiting for me. I had read Phoenix by Tezuka before, and I absolutely love that series, so I was super excited to jump into Buddha and see what all the fuss was about. Now, a disclaimer before we get into anything, I did not know anything about the story of Buddha before checking this manga out, and I knew very little about Buddhism. While I understand that this manga deviates heavily from the original story, and the vast majority of it is Tezuka's creative work. Just if I say anything in this video that comes off across as insensitive to the Buddhism community, then I apologize in advance. I don't think I'm going to, but like I said, I know very little about this stuff, so just know that if I say something I shouldn't have, it was definitely not my intention. Also, this story takes place in India. It has a lot of Indian names, of which I don't really know how to pronounce, but I'll do my best. But yeah, like I said, Buddha takes place in India in ancient times, around 500 BC. This was a very difficult time for the people of India. The land was ravaged by plagues, famines, wars. All of the societies were divided by this very strict class system that led to a lot of discrimination, with the people being divided into four categories: the slaves, the commoners, the nobility, and the priests. The further down you go, the worse people were treated, and of course slaves were treated as subhuman. And the beginning of Buddha doesn't really involve Buddha at all. It sort of just sets up this world, and we get to see the lives of a few other characters and how the injustices of this class system fails them. But the main purpose of this story is to follow Gautama Buddha, or as he was known when he was born, Prince Siddhartha. Siddhartha was born into the nobility, a very privileged position, and was set one day to become a ruler of the nation. I don't mean like India, like there were a bunch of tiny nations, they were all fighting each other. It was a very different time. But anyway, he kinda hates it. He kinda hates being a prince. He thinks it's lame. He's got all this power, he's getting all these babes, but he's not feeling it. And he's very curious, you know, with how many awful things are happening. People are dying all the time. And he's kind of obsessed with that. What is death? Where do we go when we die? What the fuck? So eventually he decides to say fuck it, and he goes off to live in the woods for the rest of his life. That's right, Siddhartha decides to become a monk. Something that, oh yeah, seems easy. But not in ancient India. In order to become a monk, to achieve enlightenment, as they call it, to understand the nature of the world, understand death, you need to put your body through a lot of ordeals, which is, you know, a nice way of saying torture porn yourself. Yeah, Siddhartha joins up with a bunch of other aspiring monks, and they just decide, you know, to damage their bodies beyond repair, because they believe that pain is the way that your soul can see God or something. But Siddhartha eventually gives up on this too, because he doesn't really see any value in it, and he goes off on his own to pursue his own means of achieving enlightenment. And from there we follow Siddhartha to the end of his life and see how he becomes known as Buddha, the Enlightened One. Buddha, of course, the founder of the Buddhism faith, was a real historical person who is said to have achieved enlightenment. But Tezuka's tale is much more than that. We see Buddha go through many more challenges throughout his life, as he tries to teach more people his ways in a very uncaring and ruthless world. And in that sense, I thought that this story was extremely compelling. I really loved this historical setting we had here, completely fucked by injustices, and how Buddha, who is like an ultra-pacifist good guy, who sees the value in all forms of life, from a human being to a blade of grass to a mosquito, how he copes with this world, how his his followers cope with it, and how it sometimes really shakes his faith. We often look at historical religious figures as these gods, these all-knowing people of great power, and while yes, this Buddha is a very impressive person, he is also a person, and he is very flawed, and seeing him overcome these challenges made for a really entertaining story. But we don't just follow him, we sort of follow the entire region of this time. There are a lot of other important characters and a lot of other socio-political events that are happening. Many of them did happen in real life, and we're seeing it here through Tezuka's fictionalized lens, of which he inserts a lot of fantasy elements to as well. Like, there are characters who just have superpowers. That's just a thing some people have here. One of these being the power of foresight, something a handful of characters can do, and it plays a significant part in the story, because we are told many prophecies throughout this series of how things are going to end up. And the common theme in all of Buddha is, you know, fate and destiny, and how you can't really escape it. So knowing those things in advance, and, you know, knowing what is eventually going to happen, it might seem like it could ruin or spoil things for you, but it really doesn't. Because as you're seeing these events play out, you're always thinking of, you know, the future vision. And you're like, oh, where is this going? How are we going to get to that point? And seeing things progress to that point and how everything sort of just clicks together by the end was really, really fascinating. The themes it tackles are really timeless. A lot of parallels between stuff that was happening when this manga was written, stuff that is unfortunately still happening today. But it doesn't even just have to do with class, it has to do with religion as well. There are characters who agree with Buddha, but they have different ideas for how they should take this new faith that they have built, and many try to commercialize it. It just tackles so many fascinating themes, and it really makes this a special story. Not without its faults, though. You see, Buddha is a very silly manga. It's extremely silly. There is a lot of comic relief in this series, which you may not have guessed based on everything I've said so far, as this is a very disturbing world with a lot of bad things happening to good people. But there is also a lot of slapstick comedy and fourth wall breaking movie references. Now, these things on their own are fine, and they're charming, and they're cute. This is Tezuka's style, and it is definitely a product of its time. However, I don't necessarily think it works super well with this story. I think back to a scene that was meant to be very dark. It's about a child murdering other children. And it's obviously fucked up. But when it happens, it was kind of played off like a slapstick joke. And that really lessened the effect of it, I felt. Especially when there are other slapstick jokes of, like, much worse things happening to people and them being fine, because it was a joke. The same can be said for a lot of the deaths that happen in this manga, actually. Like, it could be like a big moment for a character, a huge tragic death, and they just get, like, comically slammed with, like, a wall of arrows and just flop over. None of these things ruin the story at all, but like I said, it did kind of take me out of a lot of the stuff that was going on. It was this weird clash between this, you know, serious, mature adult story and a Saturday morning cartoon. Again, I know that's what Tezuka was inspired by, I know this is his style, but like I said, I think it might have been best to tone it down just a bit. And the same can be said with, like I mentioned, the breaking of the fourth wall, which happens very, very often in this manga. And it's kind of just confusing. Like, a lot of these jokes just come out of nowhere and don't really make sense or add to anything. The characters will just start talking about E.T., you know, the Spielberg film E.T., or about manga, or computers, or just all of these modern things that did not exist in ancient India. There are references to other Tezuka works that I also found to be just kind of awkwardly inserted. Again, I didn't really hate any of this, I just don't think this was the manga for that. And as a whole, I do think the story could have been a little bit tighter. There are some events that happen I found to be a little bit silly, or could have been built up better. Some things just happen really quick without much build up, which is kind of weird because then there are things that happen that have like been building up the entire series and they're phenomenally paid off. But yeah, overall, just not the tightest package of all time, but but still a highly enjoyable one. And I thought the ending was very touching, and it's one of those endings that gave me goosebumps. I was very, very glad that I read this in the end. As for the characters, there is a surprising amount of them for a series that is not this long, but of course we are covering a vast amount of territory here, following kings and slaves and thieves, even some animals. Our main boy Buddha, of course, definitely the most compelling character. His whole inner struggle between, his newfound faith and this horrible world that he lives in, it's so great. And many of the characters he meets along the way are wonderful as well and add a ton of dimension to the series. Tata is a character who we follow from the very start. In fact, because I knew nothing about this story going in, I actually thought that this kid would grow into Buddha. He does not. But while Buddha grew up in the nobility, Tata here grows up as a slave, and we sort of see what the world is like for a slave through his point of view. But also, he can possess animals. He's a warg. So that's a thing that happens too. And as he grows up and he meets Buddha, they form a relationship which I thought was really, really great. They sort of just stop acknowledging his whole warging situation, which I felt was a little weird. Like, the story didn't need it anymore, but I'm like, dude, you can literally possess elephants. Just do that. What? Depa is someone who joins Siddhartha in becoming a monk early on, and he's very set in his ways about how certain things need to be done, so seeing him clash with Buddha over their ideas, also wonderful. Someone else along for some of the ride is Asaji, this snot-nosed little fucker. He's... This is the future guy. He's the guy who tells all the prophecies. It's kind of hilarious how little he gives a shit about telling people their fates, including his own fate. He knows what's gonna happen to him, and he's cool with it. He's really cool with it, man. To the point where I thought it was kind of really stupid. At first I was very baffled that he let things play out the way they did, but after more story passes and we realize why he did what he did, I thought it worked really well. Devadatta is another character, one of Buddha's first disciples. Huge Buddha fan, very loyal. However, as time passes, they start to disagree on a few fundamental things, and this causes a rift between Buddha and some of his disciples. Something, of course, that is very common amongst religions, and that just added a whole new fascinating conflict to explore. Ananda is a character who was baptized by the devil, and therefore has devil powers. What's going to happen when he meets Buddha? Oh boy. And the last character I'll mention is Prince Ajatasatsu. Okay, yeah, that guy. This is a character who's, before he was born, we hear a prophecy of what he is going to do, and it makes people lose their cool. Just a tad. So seeing his entire life play out, with people knowing what is going to happen to him, with him knowing what is supposedly going to happen to him, was again one of the reasons I thought that these prophecies added so much depth to the story. So yeah, all around, a really great cast of characters that rounded out the story, felt pretty full and complete. I love the development with Buddha, and yeah, not much to complain about here. On to the art. Of course, this is a classic Tezuka manga with his classic style. It's very cartoony. It's not the most detailed you will ever see, especially compared to most modern manga, but it is extremely charming, it is well drawn, and it works. Like, this type of style is universal. It can work for, I feel, any type of story. Yes, it does get a bit too goofy at some times, as I talked about. But at the end of the day, it's simple, it's very clear. Uses a classic paneling style where the panels never bleed into each other. It's always very neat, nice, and tidy. He does do some creative things from time to time. It's overall just a very pleasant viewing experience. His background's also very well done. So yeah, while obviously Tezuka is not one of the most detailed manga artists around, he is still very confident, a master of his craft, and Buddha is definitely no exception to this. So those are my thoughts on Buddha, a read I thought was very fascinating, very eye-opening to something that I had known very little of, and while, as I said, it deviates heavily from, the original story of this historical figure. I do understand why a lot of people in the Buddhism faith applaud this manga, because it really did serve an interesting introduction into what Buddhism is all about. While it personally did not convert me, I am still very glad that I read it. I think it's a fantastic story on its own, and while I did have some problems with the tone and think overall it could have been a lot tighter, I would still highly recommend this one, and I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Now, if you would like to check it out for yourself, Vertical has released the series in both paperbacks and hardcovers. Unfortunately, most of these are long out of print. I think there are still a few paperbacks you can snag on Amazon, but overall, They made some anime movies too. Of course, I haven't seen them. I'm not some weeb. For alternate recommendations, I would of course check out the other Tezuka manga I read, Phoenix. I did think Phoenix, was a lot better than Buddha, and it even deals with some similar themes. It's an anthology series of past and future, sci-fi, historical stuff. Incredible stuff. I'd also recommend Vinland Saga, if by some chance you still have yet to check that one out. Another historical manga that deals with, surprisingly, a lot of the same themes that Buddha deals with. A character, of course, trying to be a pacifist in this horrible world. Yeah, I just love some existential stuff. Let's go. Thank you all so much for watching. You can leave your thoughts on Buddha in the comments down below, and I will see you again for something at some point. Woo!
राजपुत्र वो शूरवीर पर्वत को भेद दे उसके तीर